Welcome, friends. It's that time again. It's another episode of On the Way Home. I'm your host, Michael Braithwaite from Blue Door. I always say this as always, but it's true. We have not had a dud of a guest yet. I don't think we ever will because there's brilliant people in this space. We have amazing hosts, we have average hosts, but we have amazing guests on this show. This week is no exception. We have two guests today, so double the expertise and lived expertise as well, which is always awesome. Saying nothing for us without us. We should have the voices of lived experience in everything we do. It should inform all the work that we do in this sector. And so pumped about that today. Before I get to today's guest, I would not want to forget the people putting on this podcast. I think you know, I'm Michael Braithwaite from Blue Door. I work with some incredible people on the front lines doing life-saving work, trying to house people, from people that might just need a couple days of support around housing to people that might need 15 years support around housing. Everyone's journey is a little different, and we're not there to define what their journey is, but to support them along the way with housing, health, and employment services. That team at Blue Door does that work. They are incredible. The other group that co-produces this podcast with us are the amazing folks at the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. They are doing great stuff nationally, internationally, leading the way. There's so many different things they do. They do training. So go to their website at CAEH. They have a Built for Zero training. You want to become a Built for Zero community if you're not already. It's amazing stuff. Reach out to them through that. Well, they also have a conference coming up, don't you know? The very beginning of November. I will be there doing some live podcasting, so check that out. But they have hundreds of experts from around the world that come together, talk about housing, homelessness, health, prevention of homelessness, and Indigenous homelessness. All these experts from across the world come together. It's an incredible conference. If you haven't signed up, go to caeh.ca, check it out, sign up today. You will love it. It's 3-4 days of awesomeness, and it doesn't get better in this sector. So check that out. Go to that conference. It is amazing. And check them out for all the different things that CAEH is doing, the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. They are world leaders in ending homelessness. We couldn't do this podcast without them. So let's get to today's guest. I am super excited. Now, listen, many of my guests I meet sometimes for the first time on the podcast. And just coincidentally, we were going to book this podcast at a different time. And this individual reached out and said, hey, can we just bump it up a little bit? I've got this thing I got to go to. I thought, wow, that's great. You know, I was going to have to leave this thing I'm at a little early. And wouldn't you know it, we're at the same thing around homelessness prevention. And that's why we both had to change it. So we met there. And this is Mardi Daley. Let me tell you about Mardi. Mardi is an advisor, facilitator, and certified peer specialist working in youth homelessness and youth mental health in Toronto, working from the lens of lived experience. Mardi collaborates on community-based research projects to support by youth for youth resources, training, inclusion, and engagement. Mardi brings over 7 years of experience to the space and has a special interest in creating better employment opportunities for youth and people with lived experience, as well. Very accomplished soccer player. I learned all about that the last couple of days. She is joined by Dr. Naomi Thulien, a nurse practitioner and researcher committed to working with the community to tackle the social and structural inequities that cause and perpetrate youth homelessness. Naomi is a scientist with the MAP Center for Urban Health Solutions at St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto. I think St. Mike's just had a talk a day before. Today is the 14th. This will air on the 27th, but yesterday they had the Odette talk there. One of our guests, Dr. Coe, just recently, a guest, was on the podcast. So that's St. Mike's of Toronto. She is an assistant professor at the University of Toronto and in public health. In 2021, Naomi and her husband founded Breakwater Foundation, a nonprofit organization that provides rent subsidies, education bursaries, and primary health care to young women who have experienced homelessness. Incredible. Does all this and started that in her spare time as well. I don't know where she gets the spare time. Just incredible work. Naomi practices clinically at the Breakwater Foundation Clinic and at Covenant House, Toronto, which is awesome. Naomi and Mardi, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Wow, as usual, two overachievers on the show doing impactful work and inspiring work. We ask the same question to every guest that comes on the show because there's similar themes, but it's different for everyone. And that is, what does home mean to you? We're going to start with Mardi, and Naomi will go to you.
All right. So I think the question of what home is always a very tricky question to answer because the first reaction that I have is drawing a mental blank. And by a mental blank, I mean an image. There is no image of home, in my opinion. Home, even though it doesn't have a material meaning, it's a place where you want to be. I often think about it as a soft place to land because, especially coming from a lens of lived experience, home is something that may have not been safe in the past. So, thinking forward to if we had the home that we wanted, what would be there? It should be a place where you're comfortable being yourself. And further, I believe that it should be a place where you can find relief. So, speaking of home, it should be a place where you go, happy to be back here.
Listen, in all the episodes we've had, I think close to 100, no one's ever described it that way as that feeling, but love it. Naomi, your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Mardi, for that. I love that. I think what I've learned from young people, I'm still really, this idea of home, I still have a lot to learn about what that means as well. And I have learned so much from our Indigenous colleagues who I think are so much further along in their thinking about this than we are. In particular, Jesse Thistle, who worked with the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness to help them define what home is. And he talks about this notion of being rooted. And my husband and I recently bought a farm and there's tons of trees on the farm. And I think of that, like developing these deep roots so that no matter what happens in life, you're solid and you just feel strong. And to me, I think that is what home is.
Two great answers. I love that. And I love the feeling of roots. You know what the thing is? Most people don't actually talk about the physical structure. They always talk about what the feeling that home brings to you. So it is really more a feeling than a structure. It really is a good lead in to this next question, right? Because at the upcoming conference, you're presenting a session. The session is called Home is Not Really a Place, just like I said, not a place. And then young adults post-homelessness experience of connection, disconnection, identity, and belonging. Can you tell us a little bit about this? What can people expect?
Yeah. So to be honest, I'm still sorting out exactly what I'm going to say at the upcoming conference. But home is not a place is something that was a quote from one of the young people in the study that we just wrapped up. And so maybe we'll talk about the study a little bit later, but just at a very high level, we gave young people portable rent subsidies for 2 years. And half of them were randomly assigned a mentor. And we wanted to see if young people who got a mentor in rent subsidies did a little bit better in terms of social and economic inclusion compared to the young people that did not. And we actually followed these young people for 2.5 years. And half of them I followed qualitatively, meaning I met with them every 6 months for 2.5 years. And I learned so much from them. And one of the things that I learned about, and it goes back to your question about what home is, and this transition away from homelessness, it's kind of this foggy space. A lot of young people talked about feeling like a little bit like shooting in the dark. And it's sort of this in-between space where you're not homeless anymore, but you're housed, but you don't feel at home. And then plus just being in your 20s is sort of this transitional liminal space, right? And so I learned so much from the young people about the importance of connection. So connecting to yourself. And by that, I mean like mentally and spiritually, and then also connecting to others. And then how that works to build this strong sense of self and ultimately a sense of belonging, regardless of whether people had a mentor or not. So I'm going to just sort of unpack those issues. And to be honest, I don't want to do too much of the talking. I really would just love this to be more of a discussion, a dialogue with my colleagues, and to, kind of do a deeper dive into these concepts.
Very cool. Mardi, do you have anything to add? What are your hopes?
For the new project or for the conference? Because I'm not presenting with Naomi, unfortunately.
No, man. Oh, that will, it's a letdown, but I'm sure you'll be busy at the conference. So how did the Transitioning Youth Out of Homelessness, and that's what it's the TYOH, the Community-Based Randomized Clinical Trial, how did this even come about? And what were you trying to understand? And what outcomes were you hoping for?
Yeah. So yeah, unfortunately, Mardi recently joined our team, and I met Mardi a few years ago, and I was just so impressed. She came up and sat beside me at a conference, a CAEH conference, actually. I can't remember, Mardi, how many years ago that was, but she handed me her business card, the Lived Experience Lab, and I heard her speaking, and I was just like, just blown away by her. Always wanted to work with her. So now she's on our new study. So yeah, she's not presenting with me this time, but I'm sure she will next time. Just briefly, our Transitioning Youth Out of Homelessness study, which we call TYOH for short, and now we're calling it 1.0 because we're about to do a 2.0. The way that came about, Michael, was, it goes back a few years. The reason that I went back to school and did my doctoral work was because I wanted to see what it was like for young people once they exited homelessness, because there's not a lot of literature out there. There is more now, but there at the time, for sure, there wasn't very much. And so what I did was, it's called an ethnographic study. So I hung out with 9 young people that had recently left the shelter and moved into market rent housing. And this was in Toronto. And I met with them every other week, and I didn't use a car on purpose. And so I just walked around the city a lot, used a lot of public transit, met them at school, met their family, got to know them really well. And at the end, I'd done 119 interviews. And I came away from that work, really changed. I think just as a human changed. But I thought, it was way harder than I had even realized. Even though I was a nurse practitioner working at a shelter at the time, it was a way harder for young people to exit homelessness than I had ever imagined. And I thought we need to do a much better job at this. And there's really 3 key things that I felt that young people needed: financial security or financial capital. So like rent subsidies, for example, help with education. Number 2, social capital. So, connections in the community that can kind of help move you forward. And then the final thing was the idea of identity capital. So having a sense of purpose and feeling in control of your life, having a sense of confidence and good self-esteem. That's called identity capital. So those 3 things. And so after I graduated with my PhD, I was like, okay, now I want to do an intervention where we try to tackle these 3 things. So in Transitioning Youth Out of Homelessness, we had 3 community partners: the Raft in St. Catharines, Living Rock in Hamilton, and Covenant House in Toronto. And we had 24 young people, so just a small study. We gave them all rent subsidies for 2 years. Hamilton and St. Catharines got $400 a month, and Toronto participants got $500 a month. And then randomly, we assigned half of them a study mentor. And the idea was, I think I already mentioned, that we wanted to see if the young people who got a mentor did a little bit better in terms of social and economic inclusion outcomes compared to the young people that did not. And my idea was, I said those 3 things that they need: financial, social capital, identity capital. I thought, okay, so the financial capital is the rent subsidies, and then the mentors will help with that social capital and the identity capital. That was what I was thinking going in. And then, when we look at our findings, no, first of all, we didn't obviously plan the pandemic. So the pandemic hit less than a year into the study, and that made it really challenging for our mentors and mentees to connect. But what we found was that the group that got mentors didn't actually do statistically any better than the group that did not get mentors. So that was interesting. But everybody had stable outcomes over 2 years, despite being in the middle of a pandemic, and nobody lost their housing. So we thought that was good. So that's sort of my long-winded answer of why I went into the study and a little bit about the study.
Very cool. And yeah, I mean, I think it speaks so much of youth remaining stably housed is around this income supports, right? It really is just a lack of income. In fact, I remember Naomi Bedard, when she was with the city of Toronto, would say that 80% of people that come into the shelter system, which is like one and done. So they come in, it's a very short stay and they're out. And it's that 20% that you hear a lot about, the chronically homeless that have a higher acuity or more challenges that are harder to house, right? So for some, it really is just, hey, especially for youth, in the cost of housing. So no surprises there. I want to ask a question to Mardi. Mardi, you've been great at sharing, your story. And Naomi just mentioned, you're talking about interventions. And I've heard you talk about how interventions helped you along the way. And I'm wondering if you could expand on that a little bit and share as much as you're comfortable with.
For sure. I think interventions are a really interesting thing because they can be conceptual and they can be material as well. And I think what Naomi was mentioning about having a mentor was very much a part of my story, having strong role models or strong folks just existing in their own bodies. To be quite honest, it is quite something to be like confident as a person, and when you're experiencing so much precarity, that confidence is not always there. So sometimes just seeing that it can exist out in the world is a positive intervention. But we know for folks, especially young people experiencing homelessness, that they don't have those people in their lives. If anything, they have one or none, unfortunately. And so when it comes to my own lived experience, I feel like I was in a place to receive support because I got that support at a very young age. I think it gets harder as you get older to be open if you didn't have those quote unquote interventions earlier in life. And we know that the longer a young person stays in the system or stays homeless, the harder it is for them to get out. So when it comes to prevention, the earlier the better, and the earlier is as soon as possible, not waiting for kids to turn 16, 17, 18 years old. As soon as possible, we need to start building trust in systems because the systems are there ultimately to help them. But if they haven't seen any example of that in their life, if they haven't received help in the ways that they needed as a young person, the chance of them trusting in a system as an intervention is very low.
I go, thank you for that. Naomi, along the same track, when you were putting the study together, working through it, were you able to incorporate the voices of lived experts like a Mardi and how it's designed and how you deliver it to people?
Yeah. So in transitioning youth out of homelessness the first time, I would say really honestly, no, not really. Although qualitatively, the young people absolutely, we go to those qualitative findings like all the time. Like that was so helpful, and they absolutely informed TYOH 2.0. But no, we didn't have somebody with lived expertise on our team at the time like we do now, having in terms of homelessness. But having said that, we did have research assistants for sure that drew on their lived expertise in terms of struggling, with substance use and mental health and things like that. And so that was really helpful, I think, when we came to look at the data together.
Very cool. And Mardi, I think I know the answer to this, but for our friends in the sector that may not, why is it so important to have the voice of lived experts, lived experience like yourself involved in all the work or informing the work in this sector?
I think, especially when it comes to homelessness is something that is preventable, unlike mental health, which is something we may not have control over the direction that it goes. So having the voices of lived experience, when you've experienced something that you should have never been put through, all you can think of is what would have helped you, all the ways that when you look back, you go, okay, at this point, it would have been really helpful for someone to see me in more than one way. At this point, it would have been helpful to have someone to talk to, at least to seek advice. So youth are really experts in their own experiences. But unfortunately, with the relationship to research and with history, it's again hard to convince them that these are safe ways for us to make change. So in participating in co-creation, that starts to create a space to see yourself represented in the work. So by doing this work, it's almost like a form of activism, but it helps us create more informed research It's just taken many years to get to that point where I can sit with you now very confident in using my lived experience. But when I started, the sector wasn't necessarily ready for that in the ways that it is today.
Very cool and exciting to hear that in fact is changing. So Naomi, you mentioned 2.0. I'm assuming you learned a lot from the first study, so much so that you've launched in the second. Can you talk a little bit about the learnings, and as well, were there any surprises along the way? I think you mentioned the mentor piece, which was probably surprising because you thought that might make a difference. Any other learnings or surprises, and what will be different in 2.0?
Yeah, two main surprises come to mind. So one is, and I'll talk a second about mentorship and what I kind of maybe was off the mark a little bit. But a big surprise was that a quarter of the young people, so 6 of them, used the rent subsidy money to move back home with their families. So we weren't expecting that. So that was really interesting. We were happy to see, as I mentioned, that everybody remained stably housed. And if you think about it from a cost benefit perspective, if you want to look at it that way, so for example, Toronto participants, that cost us $6,000 a year to house a participant. Well, that's 4 times less expensive than supportive housing and 6.5 times less expensive than shelter housing. Again, if you want to look at it that way. So there's that aspect of it. But what's really interesting is the difference between a mentor and a coach. And I didn't understand that. I thought it was sort of the same thing. And the way that I've come to understand it as a mentor is maybe somebody that I imagine having coffee with a mentor. But a coach is somebody like, I don't know, if you're like a Raptors fan, think about like Nick Nurse, like, cheering you on from the sidelines, and pulling you back if something's going wrong, and pulling out, say, a whiteboard and be like, no, you go here and do this. At no time would Nick Nurse ever say, you sit on the bench and I'm going to go in and take your place in the game. That would never happen, right? So a coach just really helps you to see things differently. And so that was some big learnings for me. And I don't know if Mardi, so this is really cool because very serendipitous, because as I was, learning about the difference between coaching and mentoring and thinking about, that's where I think I got it wrong, was that we needed a coach, I think, and not a mentor. And what we learned is that for young people really need to at first have a sense of purpose and kind of sort of roughly understand what it is that where they want to go in life before a mentor can be super effective. And I was missing that part. So that's what we're doing differently at this time. But what was really cool was that Mardi was actually taking coaching training, and then we just started talking about it. So I don't know, Mardi, if you want to talk a little bit more about what we've done with this study. It's been so exciting for us to have Mardi on the team.
Yeah, so as Naomi said, it was a bit serendipitous because when we initially met, I wanted to be on the study, but of course it had already happened. So when there was a 2.0 and when Naomi called me and said, hey, we're going to do coaching this time, I was like, wow, I've been in these courses for the last few months and I would love the opportunity to actually see it in action, to see if my theories about it are right. But when it comes to coaching itself, what I like about it, as opposed to quote unquote service as usual, is it's exactly that. It's not part of our service as usual at all, at least not in the homelessness sector that I know of, right? We do use mentors, we do use case managers, we use all these folks that do walk alongside young people, and they play very important roles. And with the coach, what's interesting is that they do not claim to come with the answers. They're there to also walk beside you, but with the sense of distance almost, but inappropriate distance, because we're there to help you see your strengths, and ultimately people will know where they want to go eventually. Right. So the coach is there to help carve out those steps. And also what I like about it is one of the first things we learned is that people can also be mandated into coaching. So maybe they don't want to be there. How do you help someone who maybe doesn't know where to start, for instance? And so one of the first things that we would do as an exercise is chart out different domains of their life, starting with a scale of 10 to 1 as opposed to 1 to 10. Because we really do want to take a space-based approach. And we ask folks, okay, if you mark on each of these lines, so let's say one is relationships and one is housing stability and one is employment, they would show where they're at, and then we'd ask, okay, what would be an ideal scenario for you? Because we often assume that 10 is the best, and it absolutely is not the best for everyone. Sometimes 10 is not achievable, and that's okay. And accepting that that is okay is part of what the coach is there to help the person see, is that, yeah, if you want to reach an 8 on your scale and 8 is a comfortable place, that's okay. And we can work on that together, because the coach never claims to have the answer. I find it a methodology that is almost hypnotic, because we focus on the person's preferred future. Where would you want to go? What will it look like when you're there? And if you woke up tomorrow and a miracle had happened, what would it look like? And these are questions that we don't normally ask these young people. So it's a whole different methodology than what we've done previously.
Spoken like a true coach, for sure. Now, when I try and get my kids sometimes, and they're older now, so they read, when they were younger, and I'd say, you should read this book, they'd ask me, well, can I just watch the movie? And so I say that because along with the trial, there's a documentary film, right, called Searching for Home. What can you tell us about the film?
Yeah, for TYOH 1.0, we spoke with a documentary filmmaker named Katie Lamar, and she's just awesome. And we said, can you follow some young people over time that are in the study? And so she picked 3 young people. Well, we put the call out, and they let us know if they were interested in participating. 3 young people, and she followed them over a year, and during the pandemic, and during the time they had rent subsidies, and then what it was like once they didn't have rent subsidies. So it's a short documentary film, 25 minutes. I don't want to give the ending away, but what was really interesting was that there was 3 really distinct pathways that these young people ended up taking. And yeah, I'm really, really proud of the film and how it turned out. We're not able to release it into the world just yet because it's under consideration at a film festival, but hopefully we'll be able to release it soon. If people are interested in a trailer, there's a trailer on our website called searchingforhome.ca, so they can check it out there.
Very cool. And it's a wonderful lead into our next question. So where are people, and I don't know yet, but when it does come out, when you're trying, where can people go to learn more about the amazing work that you're doing? Or if they want to follow along in 2.0 or get ready for that, and in the future see the film? You mentioned a website. Maybe you could repeat that. Is that where people could check it out, or is it social media? Anything you could share with us so people can check out this wonderful work?
Yeah, well, and talk about serendipitous, you interviewing us. So we're really proud that our quantitative paper from Transitioning Youth Out of Homelessness 1.0 is released on today, October 27th, through the Journal of the American Medical Association, or JAMA. JAMA Open, and so that is being released today, and that's open access, so anyone can read that, our quantitative findings, as well as, again, www.searchingforhome.ca if they're interested in the film. We also did a short animation, 5 minutes long, about our study findings if people want to learn more.
Amazing. Well, congratulations on that work. And Mardi, you're doing a million different things. If people want to find out what you're up to and be inspired, where can they see more of your work?
Oh gosh, I'm in the Oracle, also known as Google. My work is actually all over the place, but I do have some bits in the academic stream, a little bit on LinkedIn, a little bit on Instagram. Unfortunately, I'm a decentralized resource, so I'll have to work on that.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you both. Thank you for taking the time. Thanks for doing this study. Interesting enough, it's funny, and we'll have to talk at some point in York region right now with Away Home Canada and the CAEH, Observatory on Homelessness, Canadian Observatory on Homelessness. We're looking at actually doing housing first for youth with income supports. So not quite like, it won't be designated towards rent, but what could happen with wraparound services. And we'll have a control group, like you mentioned, right? But our control group there's wraparound supports and income supports, and our control group would only get the wraparound supports. So we're interested, and we're trying to prove, of course, with the right income supports, look what can happen. And you see some of that work on the West Coast and around income supports too. If we just help young people a little more, what could happen? So we're excited about that. It is yet to be totally funded. So we're still hoping and pushing for it. But I can't wait till the 27th to see this work. And, everyone listening, if you're going to the Canadian Alliance End Homelessness Conference, check out this session. You will not be disappointed. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining me today.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks.
I said we would deliver today with two great guests. We did, not one, but two. This is exciting work. I mean, so often people say, well, we're trying to tell them something. They say, show us the data, show us the proof. And it's individuals like Naomi and the work she's doing and Mardi that bring us that proof, show us the data. Sometimes, we're surprised along the way. We learn the difference between, say, a mentor and coach, like Naomi was talking about, and that informs our next study moving forward. And we change things up a little bit and continue to push forward. Wow. Never disappointing on this podcast. I learned a lot. I hope you did too. And we'll see you next time on The Way Home.